In today's lecture, we will continue talking about how plants respond to their environment, and we will focus mostly on movement responses to the environment today. And we're going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to intersperse this lecture with using various online lectures from the web. And so at a few points during the lecture, I'm going to ask that you go open another browser window and watch something else. I'm going to show you right now how to do so. Basically, at those points, you need to go to Blackboard and look for the link called Web Links for Lecture Videos. It will be in the daily folder, and it should look like this. So open that link, and then you'll get a list of different videos to watch, and we'll go through them in the order they're listed here. So this first one from Khan Academy about auxin is the first one we'll view. And you can either click the hyperlinks or you can copy and paste the entire URLs into your browser tab. So let's go back to today's lecture. The plant we see in the background here is mimosa or sensitive plant, and we'll talk about that further along. We'll talk about three main topics today. The first is tropic responses, and these are growth responses of a plant to the environment. These will occur in a particular direction with regard to a stimulus, usually either towards it or away from it. We'll also talk, related to this, about etoliation, which is an elongation response, as well as some other responses seedlings have if they are growing in dark environments. Then we will talk about vining and how tendrils work. This relates partly to tropic responses and partly just to how plants explore their environment. And third, we'll talk about nastic responses. Nastic responses are quick reversible responses that do not have a particular direction with regard to the stimulus. Let's start with tropism. Tropisms are growth responses to a stimulus. The growth is going to be directional. It can either be growth towards the stimulus, in which case it's a positive tropism, or it can be growth away from the stimulus, in which case it is a negative tropism. It's also possible that the growth will be neither towards nor away, but at some particular angle from the stimulus, and we won't look at examples of that today. So they're directional. And because they are growth responses, this means that literally either cells are being added or cells are expanding in order to allow the movement to occur. We know that once plant cells harden their walls, then those cells cannot shrink back. That means that once the growth response has occurred, it is not reversible. So for example, if a leaf grows, or maybe a better example would be if a stem grows at some particular angle because of a tropism, it cannot later change that. And tropisms are going to occur due to differential elongation of cells in different places. So typically what's going to happen is one part of an organ, let's say the stem, is going to elongate more than another part of the stem, and that is going to cause the stem to bend, and it will either bend towards or away from the stimulus. There are multiple kinds of tropisms. We will focus on the three most common. There are phototropisms. This is going to be responses to light. Gravitropisms, which not surprisingly are responses to gravity. And thigmotropism, which is responses to thigmos. No, that was a joke. It's responses to touch. Let's start by talking about phototropisms. And what we see here is an orchid. And you can see the orchid is not growing straight up. Instead, it is growing heavily angled towards the window. Of course, the window is its source of sunlight. And so this is an adaptation to help it acquire more light. It is also sending its inflorescence with its flowers towards the window. Obviously, with the window, it's not going to help so much. But if the window pane wasn't there, that might help get the flowers out into a light environment where insects would be more likely to visit. Now, because the stimulus here is light, a positive phototropism is going to be movement towards light. This then is a positive phototropism. A negative phototropism is movement away from light. If the stem wants to move towards light, roots, for example, could conceivably show negative phototropisms if light itself is what causes them to grow downwards into darkness. We'll see that roots do respond to gravity, so it's not necessarily light that's influencing where they grow. And why grow towards the light? Well, we just said this, because light is the source of energy for photosynthesis. It's important for plants to grow in a light enough environment to perform photosynthesis. So you could imagine if a seedling, like these seedlings down here, were to germinate in the shade of a log, then they would need some signal that would help them find a path to grow up out of the darkness and then towards the light. And if that happened, that would be an example of positive phototropism. So we're going to break here, and I'm going to ask that you go to the first web link, which is to the Khan Academy explanation of how auxin leads to positive phototropism. And you will be responsible for the content. It's covered in your reading, and Khan Academy handles it at a level that is appropriate for this course. So you just learned something about how auxin leads to differential cell elongation and how that can lead to stems bending towards light. Another thing that stems can do, especially on seedlings, is if they are growing in a dark environment, they can have various different responses that will help them survive and elongate in the hopes of finding light. So etoliation is not a true tropism because it's not a movement towards a particular stimulus. It's just an upwards growth, as well as some other features. But it does involve growing, and it involves a response to the environment. So we'll cover it here. Etoliation is described in your reading, and you need to know a few different things about it. First, you should know what is the purpose of etoliation. It's an adaptation to accomplish what? And you'll see, I'll give you a hint here, this has to do with a seedling hoping it can get out of the darkness and finally reach light. Then you need to know something about how does the stem change thickness and length if a seedling is showing an etoliation response. What is the color of an etoliated stem? And then finally, if that stem that it's trying to find light and is showing etoliation, if it finally finds light, then how do its traits change once it has reached that light environment? All of that is in just maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs in today's reading in your book. The next tropism that we'll talk about is gravitropism. So gravitropism is a directional growth in response to gravity. And remember that gravity comes from below. So this might be counterintuitive, but positive gravitropism is downwards towards the earth, and negative is upwards or towards the sky. So this tree here is showing a positive gravitropism. Excuse me, I just messed up the mistake I was asking you not to make. This tree is showing negative gravitropism because it is growing upwards towards the light. Of course, below ground, its roots are presumably showing positive gravitropism as they grow down towards the center of the earth. And we can even draw that in here. We can just draw some roots growing downwards. I admit I mostly wanted to see how this drawing tool works. The next tropism we'll talk about is thigmotropism, or response to touch. And thigmotropism then is directional movement. It's a directional growth in response to touch. Positive thigmotropism is towards the side that is being touched, and negative is going to be growth away from the point that is being touched. And we can see in this picture the results of this. What we see are tendrils. Tendrils are outgrowths of vines that have a gripping function. And you can see that these tendrils have wrapped themselves around this post in order to hold the vine up. This wrapping motion is a result of thigmotropism. I will ask you to see whether this is positive or negative thigmotropism by watching a very short YouTube video. It's probably 20 or so seconds, and that is this video right here. I know what you're probably thinking, which is, why don't I just show you the video within this video? And I'm trying to avoid doing that because of copyright issues. Now, we've been talking about tropisms, which are directional movements towards or away from a stimulus. While we're talking about that, let's talk about how vines seek support generally. What we're going to look at is not a true tropism, because it's not angled towards a particular stimulus or away from it. It is just a vine exploring its environment. But I still think it's an important idea, because we often think of plants as being passive and animals as going out and exploring. And in fact, if we look at appropriate timescales, plants explore too. So this is a 42-second fun video, and you can go ahead and find that video as the next link, a vine exploring its environment right here. I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's super cool seeing especially how the vine doesn't seem to be randomly looking around, but how there's a pattern to how it searches the environment. So we have thus far been talking about directional growth movements that are non-reversible. Those again were tropisms. We now will switch gears and talk about nastic movements, which are different in several ways. They are still movements, as the name says, but now they are non-directional, and they are movements typically in response to touch stimuli. I guess they could be other things, but the examples we'll look at are all touch. They do not involve growth. Instead, they often involve rapid water loss from cells. This means that they can be reversed, and the reversal occurs by water re-entering the cells. We'll talk about a couple of examples of nastic movements. The first is from mimosa, or sensitive plant, and we'll see where that name comes from. This is the same plant that I showed you on our title slide here. And what we'll see is that the leaflets fold up as a result of rapid water loss from the cells that are at the base of each leaflet, and also water loss from the cells at the very base of the leaf petiole itself. This is a compound leaf here, so each one of these little parts is a leaflet, and this entire thing is a single leaf. We won't see this in the video, but the leaf will recover to its normal open position over a period of a few hours. It will close to this position over a period of a few seconds. It takes much longer for the leaf to recover because water has to get back into the cells, which is a longer process than the water leaving. We don't really know why mimosa and related plants fold up their leaves like this. There are various different ideas about scaring away herbivores or insects that eat leaves, or it could relate to getting out of the sun to avoid stress if something stressful is happening to the plant. It could even involve insects falling off the leaves. Excuse that sneeze. It could even involve insects falling off the leaves as the leaves fold up. We're really not sure. Let's go ahead. This is actually a video I can show you because this particular one is from Wikipedia and it is not copyrighted. So we'll see somebody touch the leaf, and then you can see the signal get transmitted from the apex of the leaf down towards the base of the leaf, and the leaflets fold up as the signal reaches each one. So sort of cool, but I think I can show you something even cooler. That was mimosa. Let's move on to the next example. And this will be our last example for today. This is Nastic movements as applied to Venus flytraps. And I'm going to ask you to go over and watch a BBC video that shows what happens as well as what is accomplished when a Venus flytrap closes. And I'll give you a clue. It's kind of mentioned in the name. So go to the third video here, or the final video, Venus flytrap catching insects. I hope that you enjoyed that video. I think it's pretty cool. We will wrap up here with just a few thoughts. First, plants move. That maybe is kind of obvious, but it's something that people don't tend to think about. And there are some movements, like the sensitive plant, where the movements are quick enough for us to see. Other movements we don't detect as humans because the movements are much slower than the timescales we are used to watching. Nonetheless, for a plant that lives for sometimes hundreds or thousands of years, that the movements are plenty fast to accomplish what it needs. I want you to think about how can you decide if a particular response is a tropism or a nastic movement. What criteria would you use? And if it is a tropism, how would you decide if it is positive or negative? And the final general thought is simply that movement helps plants acquire resources. This is true if a plant is moving towards sunlight. This is true if the roots of a plant are moving towards a high nutrient patch of soil. This can be true if a Venus flytrap closes over an insect. So even though movement is especially important for animals, it is not unimportant for plants.